President Trump's second term has been rockier than his first. We are now about 128 days in, and there have been more legally extreme measures out of the White House than blocked in court. More than the first term at this point. Right here, more market volatility, specifically driven by Trump's tariffs than any other government move driving this kind of volatility in decades. And that up and down, that volatility reflects two problems for Trump. First, widespread rejection of his trade war. And that's been a problem for weeks, which is part of why he's backed off. But second is the growing awareness of the reality that while Trump opens with the strongman approach and vows a tough stand, he then often later backs down under pressure. It's something that China found by standing up to President Trump and hitting back on the tariffs. And that reality undercuts Trump's claimed business persona, the tough negotiator who will always get results. Now, we know some people believe in that. Politically, that's fine, but we're past campaign season. Trump is president, and he's been opening with these giant bids. Some call it maximalism, if you want to get fancy. But people are learning his patterns, where he'll issue a huge demand, create a crisis, but increasingly often he will end up backing down, the Times reports. Quick example we all lived through. Trump hit China with big tariffs. He warned them, quote, "Do not retaliate," as if he could control the response of a foreign nation, which has its own economy, its own issues, its own military, just by tapping that out in all caps from the White House account. It didn't work. As you probably know, China did retaliate. They matched the tariffs. It drove a clash that went up and up, at one point hitting 145% tariffs, which is literally more than double the cost of every item from that country, and everyone knew that wasn't sustainable. In other words, we weren't going to have years with everything costing double. The real impacts began. The U.S. ports began to empty out. Companies started warning the higher prices were coming from Trump tariffs, and then the empty shelves were going to come. And as the weeks went by, before that hit an actual crisis level, Trump backed off most of the key tariffs, and he did it by himself. He blinked because China did not offer real concessions. There was no trade deal, no handshake, no big announcement where both leaders get to say everyone's winning something. No, he just backed down. And business leaders have been facing this in real time. And, you know, I always try to level with you. If you're busy living your life, you may not have understandably followed every back and forth trade threat. You might have said, we'll see how high prices get at the Walmart or the bodega, and until then, be busy with life. But the people who trade this stuff and trade stocks, they've been dealing with it daily. And the Times reports, many of those on Wall Street say Trump has clearly been chickening out. They've even coined a phrase, a shorthand, Trump always chickens out, which spells out to the acronym TACO. And this is like real news. This is really something they're saying. And that's coming from Wall Street, which leans right and is a place where negotiating is a big deal. It's a type of skill. They take it seriously. Now, today we saw the president bristles at the TACO term. He said the question, even asking about it, was, quote, nasty. That coming from a politician known for his very tough nicknames and attacks on all kinds of other people, but I guess the word chicken is too much for him today. Now, that's just in the trade war. The battles are measurable there, and the news comes fast. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is how these lessons could apply more broadly, which, it's no exaggeration to say, could affect our free speech and democracy in this country if people learn the right lessons. As Trump's approach backfires and clashes with people and groups who have at least the power and money to fight back, and who choose to fight back, who use their power. Because we can now document over these 120 plus days who is winning. And so Trump has convinced many supporters that he's the boss he played in his fictional television show, which we all remember. It was on our sister channel, NBC, back when he was just doing reality TV. But what's interesting right now is how he is trying to sort of enact that version of reality in the White House, and it is faltering. Posturing a performance, a presidential version of the boss he played in The Apprentice, is how Jonathan Chait writes in The Atlantic. quote, sitting in a plush leather chair, doling out justice to quavering supplicants. But the evidence suggests a clear pattern. Although Trump instructs targets to submit, doing so merely sets them up for more humiliation and abuse. So Trump demanded China surrender, just as he wanted universities and law firms to surrender to those executive orders, which were unfair and probably illegal, although the day they came down, there wasn't a court ruling on that yet by definition. But I can remind you, the federal government's usually restricted from using its powers to, say, punish dissent and First Amendment protected free speech. And Trump made it more likely he would lose in court because he admitted those were the motivations. He didn't, for example, say, we just are trying to make sure that we regulate law firms. He said, I'm going after firms named X, Y, and Z, Wilmer Hale, because they represented people I don't like. Harvard has power, prestige, and more money than most corporations. They've been winning. They have a $50 billion endowment, so they've been fighting back. They got a federal judge to shut down one of the retaliation plots that would try to ban any new students from abroad from going to Harvard, which seems pretty unfair and now is not happening as long as a judge keeps that frozen. Law firms who fought Trump executive orders have won 3 times just this month already. So that's the power of pushback. But that's not all. You can say, okay, Ari, that's some examples, right? That's examples on one side. Now let's just briefly contrast it to the law firms and the universities that just gave in. Maybe they were trying to avoid Trump's ire. But here's the deal. In the second term, different than the first, he is more blunt and direct. He is unshackled. And he sees their surrender as weakness that invites more abuse. Trump now openly plotting to push those surrender law firms to do even more free work for him and his agenda, even though they already gave in. Columbia is one of the universities that basically gave in earlier, and it's found Trump is not even letting up for a few weeks. New York Times headline there showing this government, with so many things to deal with, is back at Columbia arguing the school is discriminating against Jewish students as it goes after them on Trump's continuing retribution tour. Now, let's be clear. The administration is citing an area, an issue where Trump is referring to a real-world problem. Anti-Semitism is a very ancient hatred that endures. It's a problem in America. It's a problem in many countries. But weaponizing it for partisan politics in a way that has left many experts and Jewish leaders, by the way, opposed to Trump's effort to hijack the concern. That's one of the problems with leaning on a real problem to try to settle scores, because it appears to clearly be, according to the evidence, part of the ongoing retribution crackdowns, whether that's law firms that represented his opponents, like I mentioned, or students who simply oppose MAGA and Trump agenda items who happen to go to Columbia. So part of it's about abuse, an administration so extreme that it targets free speech so much that it's already run into walls in court. But the other part here is about something that I bet you know about because you are watching MSNBC, whether you're doing that on live TV or YouTube or however you're hearing my voice. I bet you have an interest in political strategy, which is still how part of the world works. And in politics, you have seasoned veterans that may have some lessons for the novices here. And no disrespect, but we've seen some novices, some rookies give in to Trump, hoping that they could just duck the MAGA politics of America right now, only to find out that's impossible if he wants to come get you. Because some of these MAGA crackdowns are coming for you either way. And surrendering will not make them go away. In the same piece I mentioned, Mr. Chait writes that winning with Trump is impossible because the relationship itself is lose-lose. Attempts to turn a productive connection into an exploitive one create these losses for both sides. That's probably the difference between compromise, which people have to do all the time at work or in life with sometimes disagreeable people or situations. The difference between that and countering an extreme threat for the extreme threat that it is. A former FBI chief who prosecuted the mafia, so he knows that turf, has now compared surrendering to Trump's second-term tactics to surrendering to mob tactics. Veteran FBI Director James Comey who is now facing yet another Trump-sparked probe, which looks like retaliation. We'll let the courts decide. Broke down exactly that comparison here on MSNBC.
They must have never seen a mob movie, because you give the mob a piece of your bar, first thing they do is bring their friends in to drink for free, then they burn it down for the insurance. They will be sorry they made a deal with this administration.
They will be sorry, says a public servant who, whatever you think of his choices, has been found across multiple investigations to be an honest public servant. And he's looked down both roads, even when he had a duty to work for Trump best he could, because he had a 10-year FBI term. He's looked down both roads, and for the groups with the power and the money, the better road, even by self-interest alone, is holding your ground and fighting, says Mr. Comey. And the record shows, so far, that has been more successful. I'll leave this up for a moment. Some of these are logos you may or may not know, but Harvard you know, and the other law firms are the ones who said, we'll fight. So far, they're winning. And others capitulated. From tech bros worried about jail time who are still being hassled to some of those other entities and bankers and groups. Now, I also want to add one more point. This idea of whether you pay lawyers and fight and go for it is not relevant for everyone. There are people who are isolated, people without money to hire a lawyer, let alone a team of lawyers. They're just more in survival mode. But for those big organizations, the big businesses, the rich elites, the law firms I mentioned, for them, the evidence suggests in these first 120 days, fighting back is not just a way to be true to yourselves, the career you've chosen. It also looks like the more victorious strategy.